The joke I was going to do is that I have a cheap Target Batman mask, and I was going to put that on, and you were going to be like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm Black Panther. Wakanda Forever. Where were the other drugs going? Remember when you said that?
And if that ends up being the cold open, nobody's going to know what we're talking about.
Hey everybody, welcome to Video Connection. I'm Aaron, this is Dan, and today we're going to be talking about Black Panther Wakanda Forever, directed by Ryan Coogler, starring Letitia Wright, Tenoch Huerta, and Angela Bassett. It is rated PG-13, and currently it is in theaters.
And I would just like to say, we're going to get through this review in less than 2 hours and 41 minutes.
The citizens of Wakanda fight to protect their kingdom from intervening world powers in the wake of King T'Challa's death. As they strive to embrace their next chapter, the heroes must band together with the help of a few allies and forge a new path for their nation.
So, Dan, what was your gut reaction to Wakanda Forever?
My gut reaction is that I enjoyed it. As with some other movies, I may have overhyped it a little bit, which might be partly due to the fact that the trailer for this movie was maybe one of the most well-edited trailers that I've ever seen.
Yes.
So I think it was hard not to get pumped up from that trailer. But despite that, I still enjoyed the movie. It's one of those things that you probably know already if you're going to like it going in. Like, if you're into these Marvel movies, you're probably going to see it, and you'll probably think it's fine. And if you're not into the Marvel movies and you don't have, 15 years of Marvel history in your head, I don't know that you'll enjoy it as much, but I think there's probably still enough going on, enough spectacle, that you'll probably get enjoyment out of it anyway. What about you? What did you think?
I think it was a little bit better than I expected. I have to confess that I wasn't the hugest fan of the last Black Panther movie, which makes me the only person on the planet to say that out loud. But Black Panther never felt 100% like a Marvel movie to me, and it felt it's almost nebulous for me, but it just never quite hit the target that I was looking for it to hit. I didn't hate it, but I say all that to say I went into this with sort of a measured view. I agree with you. I had the exact same reaction. When I watched the trailer, I wanted to see that movie. That was an excellent, excellent trailer. And I've heard that from other people as well. So that was awesome. We have this very obvious limitation of losing our lead. And I think that they handled that fairly gracefully. And I think they did a good job with it. I did enjoy it overall.
It's kind of interesting, the tricky spot that puts them in, not just to wonder what movie they might have planned to make in other circumstances, but then also you have to pay respects to the character and to Chadwick Boseman within the movie, and you can't rush that, and you've got to give it the time that it deserves, even if that adds to the runtime.
I found that to be an issue that was very interesting. Doing my very best on this one to avoid spoilers as much as I can. I think that the way that they handled the loss of Chadwick Boseman was pretty classy. I thought they did a really nice job with it, and I thought it was graceful, and it was a very dual-purpose in-world acknowledgement and a gentle real-world acknowledgement. So they handled that very well. Yet, it begged the question for me, is it better to let this character pass on in a similar fashion fact that the actor has, or is it better to let the legacy live on with another actor? Specifically because recasting someone isn't unfamiliar territory. And it was sort of fascinating to me because the more I thought about it, it almost felt, its glass is half empty, but it kind of felt like a lose-lose. Because on the one hand, if you do this, then you don't have your Black Panther, as you know him, anymore. But if you do it this way, you feel like you're disrespecting. And I read how Chadwick Boseman's brother was actually opposed to T'Challa dying because he thought that Chadwick would have much rather had the legacy live on and be bigger than he is. That's a pretty fair take on it. But at the same time, I completely understand that this character was such a big deal to so many people, and by extension, this actor was such a big deal to so many people, that it probably would have felt like it wasn't genuine. So...
Right, like you don't want anyone to feel that he was replaceable.
And I would think most people who might be up to the challenge would probably feel like, well, I don't want to be the guy that's going to replace him. That's not a job I want. It forced me to ponder, what if this had happened with another major character that was a big deal? What if Chris Hemsworth died in a car accident? Well, come on. How could you make not Chris Hemsworth be Thor? No one would accept it.
Right.
So it's, even though he may not have been in as many movies as some of the other bigger Avengers, it's the same story, and that kind of helped crystallize it a little bit for me, where I understood, right. I think you made the right call. Again, they handled it with grace, so well done.
I cannot believe that Disney, who owns Marvel Studios, allowed them to put a race of ocean-dwelling, blue-skinned people who traverse the ocean by hanging onto whale fins in a movie 1 month before Disney releases Avatar, featuring a race of aquatic, blue-skinned people who traverse the ocean by hanging onto whale fins. Like, I would have loved to be a fly on the wall when someone gets on the phone to explain to James Cameron that coincidence. Like, I wonder how he reacted to that.
I like to imagine that it was Kevin Feige that called James Cameron and said, James, I know you came up with Avatar like 12 years ago or whatever that was, but there's been blue Atlanteans in the Marvel comics for decades, so you're actually the second one to the party.
So I was going to ask about that, actually. You being more of the Marvel Comics historian, they were drawn blue in the comics, I assume?
They were after a certain point. I don't know all of the history, and I think that's one of those things that might have gotten retconned along the way. If I'm getting the names right, he has a cousin named Namorita, which there's a character named, I believe, Namora in this movie, not Namorita, and I believe those were two different characters, but in the comic books, Namorita looked like him but was blonde, and she had light skin and she had the wings. And then somewhere along the way, she went through some transformation where she mutated, and then she got like webbed fingers and her skin turned blue. And I thought that was supposed to be representative of their race more as a whole, that they had blue skin. So
okay,
that might not have been from the very early days, but I believe that became part of the canon over time. I'm going to be in such big trouble if that was wrong.
Someone will let you know in the comments.
I know.
In a very friendly and cordial way.
Yes.
I was familiar with the appearance, like the look of Namor, but I hadn't read any comics to have known like what his people looked like and whether they were all blue or if that was just a stylistic choice for the movie. So I'm glad you were able to clear that up.
And then, some more stuff that's in the fuzzy area where I'm gambling here, but I want to throw this out there. I don't want to be inaccurate. Pretty sure nobody said the word Atlantis in this movie. I believe that for the MCU, this has been altered slightly so that they're not known in that way. I'm just using the term from the comic book for clarity, I suppose. So I know it's not Atlantis.
I've been calling them the Atlanteans in my discussions the last couple of days, and it's like, I know they didn't say it, but...
Namor's parentage was human and Atlantean, in my understanding, and that made him a bit different than the rest of the people that he lived with. As many people know, Aquaman was supposed to have a human parent and an Atlantean parent, and that's what made them unique. And this might be one of those classic comic book rivalry who came up with the first type deals, since those guys both came out circa late 30s, early 40s, I think. But that's a whole other fun thing to argue about. So I just said it out loud, so I have to talk a little bit about Aquaman, because there's the part of me that has to say that between the two, I think this one handled the whole underwater race of people in a much, I'm going to say it, better way. And by better, I mean not as silly. By comparison, I felt like this movie made them look like a believable group of people that lived in a real place that actually functioned, that didn't scream, a bunch of cartoon people made this up on a page and we did it with too much CG and shiny colors and too many particle effects.
To be fair, doing a race of underwater people is hard anyway.
Oh, yes.
Like... There's a lot of suspension of disbelief that you're asking of the audience to believe that there's people that live underwater.
For sure.
So both movies had a big hurdle there to clear. Maybe this one has the advantage of Aquaman having tried to do it first, and
that's true.
And they see what to do and what not to do.
That's true. I'll give them a little bit of credit. I think something interesting might be that Aquaman tried to tackle certain problems and might not necessarily come up with the best solution, and I feel like this movie might have ignored some of them. And I can call out one case in point. There's a moment where Namor is swimming next to someone who's in a deep sea diving suit, and he just says a normal line to them and they're underwater. And I thought in the theater, wait a minute, how could you possibly hear what he's saying right now? That doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't have I mean, maybe you could, but the audio was perfectly normal with some gentle background water noises. And then I was thinking how in Aquaman it was, we went out of our way to make these air bubbles so people are standing in air so that there's always an explanation. But then the backlash, why did these people who breathe water need air bubbles? Like, they can talk and breathe and everything. It doesn't matter. I'm being critical, so I thought in that moment as sort of a filmmaker, that thing. But my immediate reaction was, no one else is thinking that. Everyone else just saw a character say a line to another character and just went on with their movie. And it actually, I thought, flowed better, despite the fact that there didn't seem to be a, science-based argument for how that possibly could have just happened.
Right. Sometimes when you try too hard to make an explanation that makes sense, you're just distracting enough that people get focused on the detail instead of just going with the scene. So I think we should talk about some of the things we liked about the movie. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I really enjoyed was Tenoch Huerta as Namor. He's not a new actor, but he's definitely going to be new to a lot of American audience. And I mean, what a great performance to be your introduction to a new audience. I think he just crushed it.
Yeah, I think that guy has a great screen presence. A character that needed to bring a lot of weight when he, stepped into the room, or rather out of the ocean. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he brought that.
And it's funny, too, because I've seen him in a couple of interview clips, and he seems very, laid back and humorous, and very non-serious. But when he's in this role, I mean, you believe that this guy is going to kill some people. Like, he has a lot of that sort of intimidating presence.
Yeah.
I think he played that very well.
He did seem like the sort of person who kind of lacks a sense of humor because his life is too hard and he's too serious. And I thought that was one of the things that kind of translated really well from the comic books, because that's something I would say is key to that character. Not much for jokes. And I liked that they did that.
I also wanted to say, I should not at this point be surprised by Angela Bassett being good. Obviously, she's been good, for years. And yet somehow I still found myself surprised with how great she is in this movie. I mean, she is the Queen Mother of Wakanda. You believe that she is that character.
Pretty much. Like, every time she started talking, I would get nervous. Like, I was really scared of where it was going. Like, when she would chill out and be an actual mom and be, then it was not so much. But in anything vaguely formal, it was just like, what's she gonna do?
Yep, she's so good.
So, I'd say minor crits with, the original. I thought Shuri was kind of irritating. Like, I didn't hate her, but she grated on me a little bit. In this one, she did not. I thought that they did a great job. I didn't think there was anything wrong with her as an actress. I thought she was just playing this sort of annoying little sister character that I think they overdid just a touch, and it kind of grated on me a little bit. But I think the writing in this one took that story where it needed to go, and she grows up a little bit, and she's been through multiple major traumas, and she's a little more mature, and she hasn't lost her personality. But, I think that part really worked well.
And on that same topic of a character sort of changing and evolving based on the events, I wanted to say that one of my sort of personal favorites from the first Black Panther is Winston Duke as M'Baku. I thought it was great not only to see his character getting, more screen time in this one, but also to see his character sort of growing and, changing and maturing similar to the way that Shuri did.
Yeah.
And, stepping into more of a mature, respectful, mentor role, as opposed to, just that little bit of poking at you from the mountains.
For sure. In fact, that's probably a pretty general note. I think that they did a good job with almost every single character that was involved that we've seen before. They were building layers and they were adding to them, and nobody, if M'Baku had come back with a one-note performance of just saying annoying stuff to irritate other people, we would have laughed and it would have been fun. So they did a little of that because obviously it's his personality, but then they let him turn into something more than he was. Overall, I kind of really enjoyed the way the movie was directed. And the reason I'm saying that with that tone of voice is just because, as much as I hate to say it, Marvel movies don't always have a ton of personality to the direction. And part of that is because you're doing it for the whole machine, not just the movie you're making. And I'm sure that's part of why Edgar Wright didn't end up making Ant-Man, because he probably wanted to make an Edgar Wright movie, and that doesn't really fit into the MCU project. So having said all that, The last Black Panther felt, in that regard, like a Marvel movie, where it was, what was expected of the bombastic action scenes and proper coverage and showing off sets and costumes, etc. And this movie did that too, but I felt like there were a lot more moments where I thought, the way you shot that really complemented the emotion, and the way that you're letting the, light blow out the highlights a bit here is creating this warmth. And, I don't find myself having those kinds of thoughts in a Marvel movie usually, because usually it's Iron Man looks awesome, which is fine because that's, part of the fun. And this movie had its big action, but I think that I could see more thought being put into the choices made about how we film this to create a certain response.
Which sort of begs the question of, what could this movie have looked like if it didn't need to fit into the overall bigger Marvel machine? What if this was just Ryan Coogler making the best Black Panther movie that he could make at this time? What decisions would be made differently if they didn't have to worry about laying the groundwork for future films and or nodding at previous ones?
And there's so many people that have become involved in this project and similar projects and other franchises that are younger and maybe don't have some huge thing that we know them for outside of it. It's always interesting to see what they do next, because a lot of the time they go to something where it's a smaller budget, but I get to do a little bit more of what I like. It's
also interesting you mentioned Edgar Wright not directing Ant-Man. I wonder if now that Taika Waititi has, done what he's wanted to do with the Thor, sort of nameplate, I wonder if things would be different and they would be more inclined to let Edgar Wright do what he wants to do to make a proper Edgar Wright feeling movie.
That's a good question.
Maybe become more open to that than they would have been a few years back.
Yeah. What's fascinating is thinking about how an Edgar Wright Ant-Man probably would have been very close to a Taika Waititi Thor movie. And the reason I think we got that Thor movie is because Thor 2 ended up being such a disappointment for so many people. That's a whole other argument I'm not even going to start getting into right now.
Still watchable, I would say, but disappointing to a lot of people.
I would even argue it was underrated, but totally get in the big picture why that was a low note. And I think that the response was, maybe we should take a risk. Maybe we were too serious. Maybe we weren't doing it right. What if we let this wacky guy from New Zealand do something a little bit different with some more jokes in it? And it killed. That's the perfect argument for, hey, you should have just let Edgar Wright do Ant-Man, and that would have been the first off-the-wall, wacky, hilarious Marvel movie that was perfectly fitting to the character.
I feel compelled to say that maybe the most recent Thor might have been Taika Waititi going too far that direction and should have been reined back in a little bit. But I feel like we're sort of losing the thread here of talking about Black Panther. We could probably talk about this. We could do a whole video just on this topic if we wanted to.
Yet another thing I'll say without being spoilery, there is a moment in this movie that gets just a touch into underwater horror in terms of theme and tone. And I thought it was awesome. And there was part of me that wished the whole rest of the movie was going to continue in that fashion, even though I knew that's not the sort of movie we were watching. To me, that was a perfect example of atmosphere in a way that I thought you were touching on, the Abyss and Alien, and you were doing that kind of stuff. And that was really cool.
I enjoyed that bit as well. So I feel like I should also bring up something that I didn't particularly like about the movie, which is the runtime at 2 hours and 41 minutes. It's a movie that there were multiple points where I became aware of the fact that it was kind of running long. And I think if you become aware of the fact that the movie's going on long, something has gone just at least a little bit wrong. It's a lot of minutes. In thinking about what could be cut, perhaps to trim it down closer to 2 hours, I mean, there's some things probably that we can't talk about without getting into spoilers. But as we talked about earlier, you want to take the time to pay respect to the loss of T'Challa / Chadwick Boseman. And that's great. You got to spend the time on that. There's no way around it. And they did that. Perhaps spending as much time as they did with, Namor's people, you might have been able to trim some from there. I kind of liked what they did there, but, you could argue you could cut some from there. Or there are a few spots where you're trying to set things up for future movies that in a world where you're not making movies for the giant Marvel machine, you wouldn't have that in there, and maybe you could trim some of that.
It was a long, long movie, and we've talked before about how sometimes it's great when movies are really short. This is obviously not the kind of movie that I thought would be that, but there were certain characters that were given just enough screen time to be relevant to the plot, but not to wear out their welcome. And then there were other characters that you kind of felt like maybe this didn't need to still be in the script. I feel like there's a strange legacy now to Wakandan characters wherein they become driven by revenge and then have to make a hard decision about whether they want to commit revenge or be better than that. I think that's something I might have treated a little differently this time around to differentiate both the movie and some of the characters. No, but seriously, spoilers! You've got T'Challa. His father was killed by Zemo. He has an opportunity later to kill Zemo. He gives this nice line about wanting to be better than that, and he doesn't kill Zemo. And you end up in a similar position here where Shuri has the opportunity to kill Namor. He's practically begging her to do it, and she decides, no, I'm not going to be a murderer. I'm going to be better than that. And then you let him go after he killed your mom. But Zemo went to jail. Like, I'm not going to be a murderer, but you deserve justice. And this was, I'm not going to be a murderer. You must ally with my people to... What? Because vibranium? It sort of eroded the moral foundation that I thought Wakanda had up to that point. I wouldn't have necessarily gone down that same road, and if so, I probably would have modified the story a bit from where we ended up.
How would you have modified it, though? I'm just curious. Like, would you have had Shuri actually kill him? Or would you have had her turn him over to the authorities?
I think I might have taken a step back and kept it more gentle so Namor hadn't done something as terrible as kill Shuri's mother, so that it would feel like he was somebody that came from this dark place that was trying to right a wrong and that he would somehow see the error of his ways. They do sort of include this gentle notion at the end that maybe he's not completely course correcting and that this has more to do with the politics of keeping this person on my side, and maybe I'm not like suddenly a good guy. So I thought Namor was almost really interesting, but he ended up sort of falling back into too many of the Marvel villains that they don't have as much depth to them as I would like them to. Like this one, it's like I thought they set him up with a nice backstory to acknowledge, like, oh, this is why he is who he is. This is why he feels the way he feels. But then it just kind of got to that same place of, I've established I'm the villain and this is why. So now all I'm going to do is punch things until someone stops me. It's like I wanted the thread to go all the way through, and it felt like it just sort of got up to that point. They took a lot of liberties with Namor's character in terms of how they changed him, which isn't always weird because sometimes MCU can stray pretty far from the comics and they're not obligated to make him a carbon copy. So that's totally fine. But I felt that since they decided to do that, when they would put things back in that were meant to be the sort of wink at the comic nerds, it felt forced. And things like him having wings on his feet that he can actually fly felt like... I remember walking into the theater thinking, oh, they won't do that. That'd be stupid. And then when he flew out of the water, I was like, oh, I thought he was just going to be able to fly and it was just going to be like part of his mutant powers. It still looks kind of silly. Like you get away with it in the comic books because it's drawn, but I just felt like that was a little cheesy. And then the other thing, which some people might not know, but Imperius Rex is like his catchphrase, and he will frequently shout that before stabbing someone through the heart with a trident. And, that's his power move. And for him to speak in another language and then you subtitle it in Latin, it just completely pulled the rug out for me, where I was like, dude, have him actually say Imperius Rex, or don't have him say it. I think it makes perfect sense that this guy in this movie would never say anything in Latin, something that most people wouldn't know how to translate, myself included.
And for someone like me who hadn't read any Namor comics and wasn't familiar with that catchphrase, I was just confused why he said that.
Right. I know Rex means king. It's such a departure that I almost would have rather they just let it be. And the simplicity of he has lighter skin, he has dark hair, his shorts are these greenish color. Okay, that's Namor enough. You don't have to do anything else since you've chosen to push him in a certain direction with a certain culture, with a certain language.
I actually really liked them taking it more in the like Mayan direction. I thought that was a cool stylistic choice. On the topic of Ironheart's suit, I find it just a little bit annoying that something that she whipped up in a few days, I think maybe they had like a week's time before the big showdown, she not only managed to make this suit functional, much like Iron Man's suit, but it's just very stylized in a way that looks like it's been iterated on, a dozen times. That was not a prototype that we saw on screen. And it just bugs me just a little bit that it should have looked something more like the very first Iron Man suit, that he built in the cave. Even with all the technology of Wakanda at her disposal and Shuri there to help her, it still should have looked like a prototype and not like, version 6 or version 7. And for that matter, I also think that the design of that suit was basically taking the suit from Bubblegum Crisis and then putting the face of Eve from WALL-E on it.
Well, something tells me if you noticed that, you're not the only one. I think it is completely fair to say that character could have been removed completely from this movie and the script would not have suffered for it. I think that I appreciate that there's a stake there where you've got an innocent person and the bad guy wants to kill them and we're trying to save them. But I think that they could have very easily redirected around that by simply having a couple Wakandans out in the world who are trying to find out how they invented this vibranium detecting thing, and Namor's trying to get it too, and that pretty much would have brought us to the same place.
Or you still could have had a scientist at MIT come up with it, but just have it not be a storyline character. Just let it be sort of a throwaway character, someone they try to keep safe, and then maybe they're unsuccessful, and they get him on the bridge or something, and then let that be that. You still have set up, the situation. Absolutely. Without then needing to devote, 20 to 25 minutes to that character in order to keep the cogs of the machine turning at the right rate.
So, Dan, would you recommend Black Panther, Wakanda Forever?
I would recommend it. I feel like there's a certain part of the audience that already knows they're going to go see it or has already, and if you know who you are, you're already going to like it. What about you? What do you think?
Generally speaking, yes, I would recommend the movie. Obviously, if you like the Marvels, go see the Marvels. I'm not talking about that one movie. I meant, you know what I meant. I think this movie did have some stuff going for it that was a little over and above the usual Marvel movies, so I applaud them for that. And I think that they did a nice job of telling, for lack of a better term, a contained story about this portion of the universe. So
if you want to see a big, flashy Marvel movie, you'll want to go see this one, but we would advise you not to drink a lot of coffee or soda immediately beforehand.
The only person I would imagine not wanting to see it is the person that says, I sure am sick of all these superhero movies, which there's a few movies in the theaters right now. We could say that too. So other than that, it was pretty good.
That's all the time we've got for now. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time here on Video Connection.
See ya.